Welcome to Amplifying Voices, NC2ML's We All Speak Math podcast, where we take a deep dive into the power of dialogue and mathematics education. I'm Josh Griffin.
And I'm Emily Hare.
And I'm Margaret Borden. This podcast is part of the statewide We All Speak Math campaign from the NC Collaborative for Mathematics Learning, dedicated to enhancing student discourse in the classroom.
In today's episode, we are reflecting on our time together so far, as well as the connections to NC2ML's vision of mathematics instruction and the recent state math conference.
Well, this is the point that I normally say you are all in for an enriching discussion, but that feels pretty weird since it's just going to be the three of us today. So instead, without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive into today's episode of Amplifying Voices, NC2ML's We All Speak Math podcast.
Welcome to the We All Speak Math podcast. It's just us this week, your hosts, Emily Hare, Margaret Borden, and Josh Griffin. We're excited to reflect on all of the great work around the state that's been going on this semester.
So recently, NCCTM held their annual conference in Winston-Salem. The theme was actually around flourishing and the power of math teaching. We, on this podcast, we were talking earlier, we haven't really had a chance to connect back to our original kind of vision statement from NC2ML around high quality and equitable math instruction. So I actually want to read it to you. It says, each and every North Carolina student deserves to experience equitable, engaging, and high quality math instruction, fostering confident mathematicians that flourish in and through mathematics. So I wanted to read that because we actually partnered with NCCTM this last month to put on this conference and with this theme around flourishing. So that was why Francis Su opened us up with his talk around mathematics for human flourishing, the book that he published. A lot of our work with NC2ML is based off of that. So this flourishing word is super important for our team with NC2ML. So I'm just curious about, at the conference, what did you all see about connections to this idea of flourishing or mathematics for human flourishing throughout the conference? Margaret, do you want to go ahead and share?
Yeah, totally. I really had a great conference this year, and I wanted to share one story that happened in one of the sessions that I was leading about project-based learning in math education. And I'm drawn to this word engaging because the conversations that were happening in that session were like, how do I take my project that my students are like all excited about and engaged in and use it to engage them through the rest of the unit, which was very aligned with what we were talking about in our session. And so as we were talking with teachers, they were realizing that they had this dessert project and they felt like they had to teach every math concept before they went and did the project, or their students wouldn't be successful, but they were losing the engagement in the math and then gaining it back in the project. And I was like, well, what would happen if you just took that idea that is engaging them and put it at the beginning of the project, but then taught your stuff just connected to the project? And light bulb moments were going off all over the room because teachers were like, oh, I could see how they don't have to know all the math yet to still get excited about designing a house, for example, to still get excited about whatever project that they were doing. And then that math becomes more applicable to the students. They see how it's connected immediately, and they're engaged from the beginning because they're now seeing why they need to learn this math so that they can keep designing their thing or doing their project. And it was just really powerful to see that light bulb go off all over the room, and different conversations with different teachers who weren't even talking to each other. We're having similar excitement about just this small tweak to take their what we call dessert projects and turn them into what we call main course projects. So it was a really cool experience. I hope there's lots of human flourishing happening in those classrooms now.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Emily.
Well, I just love that experience because it makes me think of that play virtue that is in Dr. Seuss's work. So for those of you who haven't read his book, check it out. He talks about the different virtues that we should be thinking about with the purpose of mathematics. And we'll actually link a video with him talking about expanding what mathematics is in the classroom. But we have a curriculum that is based with lots of different tasks. And there's task in the beginning, and there's task in the middle, and task in the end, Margaret. And it always reminds me that we have to like let go a little bit in the beginning and be like, this is just for them to play around. Like it's okay in the beginning of the linear unit if they're not writing the slope and y-intercept, right? Because they're just like looking at patterns and trends, and we're going to connect to that later on. So don't freak out when they're not using math vocab at the beginning of the unit and they're using like how they're making sense of it. I love the way you kind of position flipping those tasks to the beginning. That's really cool. Josh, you want to share?
Well, I think before I share my experiences, I love how what you both just said links back to the in progress thinking in one of our earlier episodes. So it's kind of neat to see that what we're doing is so intertwined with everything that we're all the people that we're talking about. But for my experience at the conference for the human flourishing, I'm not going to lie to you. I was only there the first day. I couldn't make it to the second day, and a lot of the sessions that I went to were district level DPI stuff. But I did have the experience of having a session myself, and where I brought a bunch of my really, really great teachers to come in, and we talked about in a lens of a formative assessment lens, having our kids take really difficult tasks and the way that they're using the tasks to kind of promote that productive struggle in order to kids to kind of, play with math and get over the hump. I have one teacher that is taking these common assessment tasks, and she's giving them to the students at the beginning of the class period and giving them like 5 or 6 minutes to kind of think on their own. And then she'll either do like some type of discourse move. Typically it's, like a think, pair, share or something like that, where the students actually have a thinking partner and they take another colored pencil and they'll, add to their thinking, or they'll change their thinking, or have some type of modification to help get there. And she'll just facilitate the whole entire way in order to try to get them all over those cognitive struggles. So it reminds me a lot of mathematics for human flourishing. Emily, I know you have a bunch of hats on, but I did see you at the conference. Did you catch anything with mathematics for human flourishing?
Yeah, I think my most favorite moment, I think a really powerful moment, was actually the opening session with Dr. Sue himself. We haven't had a conference in the last few years where we've had just like a keynote block session where there's no other sessions going on. And we did that this year with Dr. Sue because he was so important to the theme around flourishing. I mean, that came from his work. And I remember it was that very first session at 8:30 on Thursday morning, and I just looked around and the room was full, right? Like there's probably 500-600 people in the room. And he was just talking about, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, expanding the purpose of why we do mathematics. And I've been thinking a lot lately around how it's not like a or with like, do we prepare for all of the pressures that we have with state assessments and our standards. Like it's not a or. You don't either focus on the virtues or the math practices or insert however you want to call like that flourishing experience, or prepare for assessments and prepare for standards. It's a both and approach, right? So like you can still prepare for end of year assessments and still be standards driven, and also provide those experiences where kids get to play and be curious and just enjoy mathematics, right? And I just remember some of the analogies he used and watching all like 500 or 600 educators across the state, just really thinking about that critically.
I kind of want to turn the wheels a little bit, and I want to talk about the three of us and how we're using this, because we've gotten a lot of great people to come on this podcast and talk about what they're doing and how we're taking NC2ML's work and kind of molding it to our own. But I'm curious, what are the three of us? What are we doing with this campaign, and what are we doing in our specific roles to kind of promote the discourse move? So, Emily, bounce it back to you.
Sure.
Can you share what you're doing with this?
I love talking about this. So I think everyone knows, but just as a reminder, I'm a director of mathematics in one of our large urban districts in North Carolina. And we've been doing a lot of work around vision the last couple of years. We've just recently updated our vision of high quality and equitable math instruction. And that's actually turned into our entire district having and defining their vision for high quality and equitable instruction as an academics department, not just as a math department. So that was really cool to watch. In fact, I just got to put this plug in. That word flourishing has shown up now in the whole district vision. And I just love that flourishing word that's so dear to our heart is now kind of being spread across different departments, and we're really leveraging that sort of joyful experience. But what we do with all of our schools, I do most of my work now with school leaders, and we kind of define school leaders as a team approach. So it's not just about the principal and it's not just about the coach and it's not just about our math teacher leaders, but it's about what happens when those three roles come together, right? And how they're working together to support their educators and their building. And so a lot of my work with those school leadership teams is to help them develop a problem of practice every year, particularly in our secondary schools. We've been doing this with all of our middle and high schools now. And so each year, we start in the summer, we talk about where we're at, we look at lots of data. We've been looking at how to expand our data sources. So it's not just about end of year assessments and like student achievement data. It's also about like school trends and instructional practices, right? So like across the board, are we using these discourse moves? Are we leveraging student thinking in the classroom? So we have like lots of observations that we never look at the teacher level, but we do look at the school level to say what are patterns and trends that are happening at the school level. And so we have surveys around students' math identity and agency that we also look at to think about how, like, what's the problem that we're sitting in, the context that we're sitting in right now, and what's an actionable thing that we can take to move ourselves closer to our vision. So each year, every school team comes up with a problem of practice and then action steps. It makes me think of Dr. Munter's episode when we were talking to Chuck and he was talking about incremental steps to get to the vision. So we have a problem of practice, we have action steps, and we just take one step closer each year at each site, depending on what their contextual features are, to get closer to that vision. And I say all of that to say the Discourse Move campaign has been so helpful in that work. Because, for example, like we have some schools working on like our students' math identity and agency in the classroom, where we're like, hey, you know what? Assigning competence is really important in order to do that. And here's this toolkit of resources for not just the coach, but also for the principal and also for the teacher and also for the PD facilitator to come together and think about how I can support in making assigning competence more evident in my classrooms across the board. So that has just been really life-changing. That was dramatic, life-changing. But also, if you think about it, possibly, right? Like we're trying to give kids these experiences that help them see themselves as math knowers and doers. And so those quick little tools that we can just say, like, this is one easy lift we can do. We can make this one move that's going to have really big change for our kids. And that's been really powerful for our school leadership teams. That was a lot. So I would love to hear what you two are also doing. So Margaret, what are you doing in your context with this campaign?
Man, I mean, it sounds like y'all are doing awesome work over in your district. Thanks for sharing that. It was so great. Um, I guess first off, I've been doing, so to remind you, I am both a researcher. I'm in grad school still, and I am working as a consultant in a variety of different school settings. So I often find myself in these little conversations with people who I know very like not well, like a new conversation, new relationship. And regularly, I hear them saying things like, man, I really just wish my teachers could learn how to support their students talking in class more. And it's so cool to me to be able to be like, hey, let me point you to this podcast I'm co-hosting, or let me point you to this set of resources. And every time they look at it, they're like, wow, this is great. Thank you so much for sharing. So I also am really appreciating the campaign and the work that we've been doing, because it does seem like this time is ripe for having these resources available to people and being able to point them there. I was even in a conversation with a special education math teacher the other day who was like, I am trying to convince the other math teachers that they need to get their students talking, and like I just don't know how to, convince them. And I was like, hey, like let me point you to what we've got going on over here. So it's been a really awesome experience for me. But in my research work, it's also been really cool because with my head in the discourse moves, I've been able to notice connections to the discourse moves and what we've been doing within the ways that we've been analyzing our project-based learning work. And there has not been a lot of strong connections in research between these two like strong areas of research with project-based learning work and with discourse, even though they are so intertwined and so important for each other. And so recently, my team took the NC2ML discourse moves framework that we came up with, where we took Beth's work and added in some of Mandy's work and the list of discourse moves that we've been working with. And we applied those as codes to transcripts of when teachers were engaging in small groups with students at a interesting like PD summer camp thing that we had going on, where students were doing the project-based summer camp, and then teachers were learning about project-based learning, especially within our curriculum that we were testing with the students. And then the teachers would like pop in and like talk to the students and like get to practice facilitating these ideas. And our whole thing in the study was to just learn about what teachers were doing, their wisdom of practice. And like we didn't talk about discourse moves or coach them on what to do in those conversations at all. We just wanted to see like what happened when they went in and practiced with facilitating students. And what we noticed was that they were using all of these discourse moves, but some of them they were using all the time, and some of them they were not using quite as much. And so it helped us understand like where we could support teachers more with discourse moves in a really intentional way. And it was a lot of those empowerment ones that get kind of hard that we put at the end of the campaign because they're so hard. And let's work up to these. Those are the ones that, we need to be supporting teachers more on, because they might do it a little bit naturally, but they're not doing it as often as they're doing some of the other ones, like assessing or advancing student thinking or revoicing or inviting. Those are really natural for teachers, whereas like assigning competence, attributing, those are happening naturally, but they're not happening as often or as powerfully as they could. And so it was a cool opportunity to learn from the campaign and the teachers on how we can make these small group project settings even more powerful for students. So I've been vibing on this campaign.
I think we all have. And I want to point out too that we did not intend to do this, but Emily, you mentioned Chuck, and Margaret, you just mentioned Beth and Mandy, and I'm going to mention Cindy and Allison in our last episode, because the work that I've been doing, and unlike Emily and I are on like two polar opposite districts. She's in a really urban large district, and I am in a very rural small district. And I know that we both have, some similar problems, but we also have a lot of different problems as well. But the problem that we're facing in a small rural district is just having teachers. And I know that we all have teacher shortages across the state, but specifically in our middle schools, and I know this is common across the state as well, but in our middle schools, we're getting a lot of teachers that don't have that teacher prep program. They haven't have a 4-year degree in mathematics education. A lot of them that are lateral entry have a degree of some sort, but it's not in education. So typically a lot of new teachers in their first year that don't have that prep program are reverting to how they learned. And how we learned back when we were in high school, for me, it was like 25 years ago, isn't necessarily the way that we want our kids to learn now, because we don't have the same skills, or kids don't have the same skills now that we had back then. So we actually are having to be our lateral entries teacher prep program as they're teaching. And as both of you have alluded, and as Cindy and Allison alluded, that the discourse moves are the best bang for a buck. It's the best way to get pre-service teachers or lateral entry teachers, for that matter, to be able to move that needle to get kids involved in order to kids enjoy mathematics and break up the mundane monotony of your traditional direct instruction where the teacher is just standing at the front of the room and lecturing. So those discourse moves in my lens have been very, very powerful. Now, for those of you that don't remember or didn't see the first episode, I'm the testing guy in my district. Even though my background is in mathematics education, I am the director of testing. So I kind of have to stay in my lane. And the way that I sneak over into curriculum is through that testing lens. So we have common assessment meetings where we preview what's coming up in the test, and we embed those discourse moves with those kind of like test prep or okay, this skill is going to be tested, so how are we going to best teach that skill? And those discourse moves are always embedded into what we're talking about, because the discourse moves, in my opinion, although there's a lot of research behind it too that we've been sharing throughout the whole entire time, is the best way for kids to learn mathematics. So this is something that we use every single day, and it's helping a small rural district that doesn't have a lot of resources as far as teachers with teacher prep programs, which I think is common across the state, no matter what size district you have. It helps them get comfortable to teaching and not be one of those that stick in it for a couple of years and decide it's not for them.
But I love to hear about it in different contexts too, right? Because I think it speaks to how it's transferable in lots of different contexts, no matter if you're in large urban districts, small rural districts, or anything in between, right? And also that it's just manageable. It's something that teachers can do no matter what curriculum you're using, no matter kind of like what you've already been doing in your classroom. You can at least start incorporating some of these discourse moves. So I really liked hearing about all those different examples that the three of us just shared.
Yeah, and it leads me really nicely into my next question because we've been talking about the campaign. And I was curious what for you guys has been the most exciting piece of our campaign, of the We All Speak Math campaign movement this school year, and why. And just to remind everyone out there, or to let anyone know that hasn't been following our campaign, we've had last year, we put out support or gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? We put out resources every month for a different move, and there were resources for teachers, resources for PD coaches, as Emily was describing, and resources for admin. And so this year, we still have those resources, and we are still putting out more stuff each month. And now we are supporting those resources with things like back to school culture building activities that you can do with this podcast, of course. We have a research article in the October MTLT issue that we did together. And of course, you've seen some coherent language coming across the state through the DPI webinars that we've been supporting, and NCCTM, and the NCAT session that Emily is at right this moment. So please share with us. Josh, we're going to have you start off. What's been the most exciting piece of the campaign movement for you this school year, and why?
I hate to bring up what I just talked about, but I gotta say those resources that was created, and I say I was an administrative piece, but the resources that were created last year have been so impactful. Watching teachers kind of get the discourse moves, watching the light bulb come on for them reminds me back when I was in the classroom and those aha moments with my kids. Like I'm getting that now through educators, and not only is that making their lives easier, but it's also, fostering strong foundational knowledge for all of their students. So watching that light bulb moment for me, for those teachers, is something that makes my job worth it. So that's probably my most exciting piece, and it's all stemming from those resources that were created last year. Emily, what about for you?
Yeah, those resources are the foundation of our work, right? So I agree with all of that. And there's been some couple of really exciting things. And one is something that we haven't really even talked about in this podcast, but it's actually a video of high quality and equitable instruction from classroom teachers in North Carolina on our high school homepage. So when you go to nc2ml.org and you click on the high school resources, it's like the first thing that you see. And it's from YouTube, and it says, this is what high quality and equitable math instruction looks like, and this is what every student in North Carolina deserves. And I remember I help out sometimes with the social media accounts with NC2ML. And I was looking for something to put on there, and I threw that video up and I just put that statement on there. And I remember watching the traction that it got, like on the insights that you get as one of the collaborators on that page, and just watching it blow up and watching the comments talk about how it was just so wonderful to see examples of that of classrooms. And I've got it pulled up because I wanted to acknowledge the teachers that are in that video, because one was from Charlotte Meck Schools, and it's Kristen Fye, and the other was Chris Klein from Cabarrus County Schools. And you get to hear from their students. And we've started using this video in some of the vision work we're doing across departments in my own district. And I'm not even joking, I've seen tears. This video is so inspiring when you get to hear the kids talk about their past experiences and being in Miss Fi's and Mr. Klein's class, and how they really are allowed to play and be curious and ask questions, and how this is what it feels like to be a math student. It's really inspiring. So if you have not checked that out, go check that out, because I think it's a really good picture and description when you're communicating this vision that we have for high quality and equitable math instruction to other people in the state. So that has been a big thing for me lately. I also wanted to mention I was really excited about our October MTLT article. So MTLT is the big like practitioner journal from NCTM, our national conference. And in the October issue, they were doing a special edition around results of principles to action, which is kind of like our canon of math literature about everything we know about research on math education. I think it came out in like 2011 or 2014 or something. I can't remember now. But anyway, it was 2014 because it's the 10-year anniversary. Duh. And so they featured this We All Speak Math campaign as a part of that work because of how we are leveraging discourse moves to get at some of the effective teaching practices from NCTM. So that was a really exciting moment for us as a campaign as well. Margaret, you have anything to add? I know you asked the question, but what are other things that you had exciting moments from this year?
Yeah, thanks. I want to echo that, especially as a researcher, and being in this research role right now. That MTLT article was really powerful, to be able to point back to this work as I'm continuing to further it in my other projects. The other thing that I've been really, really excited about is just the conversations we've been able to have on the podcast. But I have y'all have been giving me trouble off screen about being a fangirl, and I have been fangirling like crazy all semester with all these fantastic people we've gotten to speak with. But I am so thankful to be part of like these conversations and to get to hear these fabulous people give us insight into the work they are doing that has inspired so much of the work that we are doing, that I'm doing across various projects. And so I've been really, really excited about this work, and thankful to be a part of it too.
Well, that was such a great segue, Margaret, and I'm going to make us all pick one. So if there was one powerful moment and I'm only letting you share one, what would be your most powerful moment from the actual podcast episodes, from all the guests that we've had on? I'm curious what it would be. All right, Margaret, are you ready? Do you have one? Your one
Uh,
powerful moment.
I think so. I think for me, the one that comes to mind was talking with Mandy Jansen and hearing about how the language of rough draft math came from the teachers that she was working with, and this moment where they were like trying to, grapple with I again, this is a researcher perspective, but like the power of articulation, I think, can be part of why these discourse moves and the discourse campaign that we've been having has been so powerful for people, is that like they do a lot of this work, but when you can articulate it, then you can become intentional about it. And those teachers that Mandy was talking about were, had some language to it, but it was kind of clunky language. And they were like, it's like, it's why can't we just do like the English teachers do and just have rough drafts? And she was like, yeah, rough draft math, like let's go. And it was like just so cool to hear how she was empowered by those teachers, but also she was empowering those teachers, and together they came up with this language that has now become so helpful to the rest of us for conceptualizing what in progress thinking looks like and how to facilitate it and how to support it and how to help students be intentional with their learning experience, and not always needing to be perfect the first time that they do something in classrooms. So I think for me, that was probably the most powerful moment. What about you, Josh?
It's kind of unfair that Emily's making us pick. It's like choose who's your favorite child.
I
It's so hard because we all have a lot of really dear friends that are on these episodes, and I'm looking forward to what's coming up next because I see a lot of familiar names that are coming. But I'm biased when it comes to this, and I've said this last episode, and I'm going to say it again. My favorite, most impactful moment is talking to Cindy and Allison. That is by far, they're two of my favorite people in math education. Allison in particular was on my dissertation committee. She had me in my master's program. I've had a lot of classes with her, and just to me, she's one of those pillars that I always learn something. And the amount of resources that we had in our last episode,
And they wouldn't fit on the podcast notes.
they wouldn't even fit on the podcast page. Like you have no idea. As soon as that episode was over, I started writing down everything, and I was like, all right, team, we got a lot more stuff to dig through. Let's go ahead and just using that now, and the amount of math ed arsenal that I got from that one episode just made a huge impact in the work that we're doing with our lateral entry teachers. So my most inspiring moment has to come from Allison and Cindy. So I know that's kind of mundane and I'm just repeating myself over and over again, but I'm sticking to it. That's my final answer. Emily, what about you? Who's your favorite child?
We were all so shocked that you said that, Josh. None of us saw that coming. I think my most powerful moment was with Alicia Conklin in Iredell Statesville County Schools and Beth. When they were talking about, and I think that episode was around several of our discourse moves, revoicing, inviting, and waiting, I think. But actually the most powerful moment was for me was the positionality piece in that episode. And it's connecting actually back to NCCTM's theme of flourishing and the power of mathematics teaching, because I think we had lots of conversations in that episode around the power that adults have in this system to create opportunities for students to see themselves as math knowers and doers. And I'm not sure that we all always realize the amount of power that the adults in the classroom with kids or the adults leading the school have in a child's not just school life, but life in general. And so when we really started talking about, it's not just about learning these moves to increase discourse because somebody says discourse is a good thing, right? It's about learning these moves because as the adult in the classroom, we have a lot of power to position students as either they know what they're talking about or they don't know what they're talking about. They belong in this room or they don't belong in this room. They deserve to do math or they deserve for math to be used to harm them. And we have to admit that has been used historically. Math has been used to harm some of our marginalized communities. And the power that we have as adults in those spaces to instead leverage it as a tool to say, let's make sense of math so that we can make sense of the world around us and the stats that we're shown and all of the things that people throw at us all the time. And we can make sense of what's happening in our world through mathematics. And as an adult, I'm going to position you as belonging in the space is a super powerful part of this movement that we need to make sure that message gets across as well. It's not just about learning the moves to increase discourse. It's about learning the moves so that we can position students as knowers and doers of math. So that was my favorite moment. I love positionality. I love all the work around positionality. And I even think about that when I'm leading professional learning opportunities, right? Like with teachers, like how are we positioning teachers as knowers and doers in that space of not just mathematics, but also the practice of teaching mathematics. So I've been thinking a lot about that lately. That's my one powerful moment. There are lots of them, but that's my most
Yeah,
powerful moment for me.
I think we should give a special shout out to Chuck and Joe and also Jeff and Rob. Those episodes were great too. And I know that all of us have gotten at least one thing out of every single episode we've done. So shout out to Chuck and Joe and Jeff and Rob for their contributions and their work and what they've given us and the discussions we've had with them too. I don't want to leave them out. I love all my kids, Emily. I love them all.
This is Josh taking it out on me that I made everyone just pick one. I will say I've used clips from all of them in lots of PL settings. Like this week we're at NCAT, and there's a moment in Chuck's episode with Chuck and Joe Reaper where they were talking about incremental change, and we just showed that clip yesterday in the room across the hallway that I'm in right now to talk about like the reason why we set vision and incremental change. And I've done a lot of stuff with clips from the Jeff episode for some other PL opportunities. Sure. So,
For sure.
all right, Josh, we didn't just pick one.
We also need to give a shout out to Emily Myers, who came on with Mandy Jansen and her because wow, they were powerful as well. And hopefully you get to see her while you're at NCAT, but I don't know because she's
she's here with us. Yeah, Emily and I, we had the Emily sandwich this week. We're both working with teachers at NCAT with lots of our other folks from NC2ML. It's been a good time.
And since we haven't had the chock full of resources in this particular episode that we've had in some of the other episodes, I did want to bring up one resource that you reminded me of, Emily, when you were talking about positioning and the power of mathematics and mathematics for harm. And that is Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein's, Marilyn Frankenstein, I believe is her name, work on social justice for mathematics or mathematics for social justice. We'll have to look up exactly what it's called, but she's got all of these amazing books and tasks that are designed for students to make sense of their place in the world and how math has been used against them in the world, and then to turn that on its head and really, find ways to make math useful for them and to bring justice to themselves and to their community. And it just is really, really cool work. And so since we don't have a ton of resources in this one that we're going to be connecting to our resource page, I thought I'd put a plug in for one more little thing for us to go check out with our people and our teachers.
Thank you for that, Margaret. We normally kind of end these episodes with talking about how to connect with the guests that are on. But I actually want to reframe that this time to talk about how we want to connect with you all as our listeners. And so we want to hear about some of the stories of how you all are using the We All Speak Math campaign, whether it's through the podcasts or through the toolkits or through any of the resources that we've put out. So we're going to have a Google form in the podcast notes for this episode, and we'd love for you to fill it out to tell us about how you're using some of these resources. We're actually looking to expand some of the guests that we're having in the new year. So we'd love to hear what you all are doing because we are always looking for guests to have with us on the Amplifying Voices podcast. So if you're listening to us right now, when you get to a safe spot, because you're probably in the car driving right now, go and open up the podcast notes, click on that link and fill out that form. And we'd love to connect with you.
Well, thanks, Emily. Yeah, we look forward to hearing from y'all's stories and from the people that you think of that you'd like to hear from on our podcast. So thanks for tuning in again. That's it for today. We appreciate all of y'all coming to listen to our We All Speak Math podcast. We have loved the support and feedback across the state. And in fact, y'all, I just found out that we're getting some support in the AMTE NC newsletter that's coming up this month. So we really appreciate all that the people are doing out there, and we can't wait to hear more from you. And we hope to see you again next month.